talk about semiconductors, the chips that power the world, and Taiwan's key leading position in the industry, and we're going to learn a little bit about how they work. With me in the studio is Dave Adelman. He is the Managing Director of Siltronics AG, which is one of the world's leading manufacturers of wafers. So, Dave, you're in a great industry. I think everyone knows by now, or most people, how important semiconductors are, even Warren Buffett. He recently bought a $4 billion stake in TSMC, Taiwan's biggest, semiconductor foundry. What do you think of that purchase?
Well, I think it's pretty much a compliment to TSMC that the world's greatest investor, or at least most famous investor, decided to put that kind of money. They must be impressed with their technology and their market position. And also, it probably didn't hurt that the stock market had taken a little pullback.
That's right.
In recent times. Another important thing with Warren Buffett, he's always been very bullish on Apple. And Apple buys most of the world's chips, actually. About 11% of the world's chips are purchased by Apple. TSMC is a tremendous supplier to Apple. But it's not a surprise.
TSMC is the largest maker of high-end chips, about 90%. Do you think any other country or company can compete or catch up with TSMC?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I want to share some information. There's a book that's recently come out, written by an economic historian named Chris Miller. The book's name is Chip War. He says in there that the fabrication and miniaturization of chips is actually the greatest engineering accomplishment of our day.
Wow.
And I truly believe that, after being in the industry for so long. You know, TSMC can make a chip that has 9 billion transistors on it. It's only the size of a postage stamp. It's just amazing. You know, one thing about being in the lead is that it shows the others that what you're doing is possible. And, for years, I remember 90 nanometers was not possible. I remember that. People would say that. And then I remember 45 nanometers wasn't possible. And then I remember 28 nanometers and so on and so on. And now here we are at 3 nanometers, and we're doing it. So historically, Intel has been the leader, has been blazing the trail, and it's TSMC's turn. But I'm not sure if anybody will catch them, don't know. One thing for sure, they're not going to slow down. They're going to continue to push forward. So we'll see.
Well, it seems that the U.S. is really concerned. I mean, they recently passed the CHIPS Act, which is trying to build up the production of chips in the U.S.
Right.
So how do you think that changes the game in terms of, chips being made in the U.S., Taiwan? Of course, the U.S. rival is China, right?
Yeah.
So how is that going to change things?
It's really been a long time coming, but the pandemic is what pushed it over the finish line. What had happened was the pandemic created a microchip shortage. People were having trouble getting their iPhones. Car manufacturing was basically shut down around the world because they couldn't get chips that only cost 10 cents. They were shutting down lines. And so it became a really big topic. And the U.S. government realized that in 1990, the country was producing about 37% of the world's chips. Today, it's only 12%. And they realized that, and they got bipartisan support to pass this $52 billion CHIP Act to subsidize manufacturing in the country. But they're not the only country doing this. Europe is also doing it. They passed their own act. What'll happen for the future, it's hard to say. I think the U.S. will definitely make more chips in the next 10 years or so. But from a worldwide perspective, that 12% still may not move very much. It may stay about 12% because everybody's building. Everybody's
increasing.
Exactly.
Well, I think a lot of attention has been given to Taiwan because of the threat of an attack by China. So chips are also linked to global security, national security. Can you tell us the relationship between these little chips and national security?
So the most powerful chips are certainly used in military applications, cybersecurity, things like that. So there is a concern that if one country couldn't get those chips, then that could limit their abilities to defend themselves. But that's a very small percentage of the total amount of chips that are sold. Less than 0.5%, probably even less. But they're very important.
I'm actually curious, because I think a lot of us talk about chips or silicon wafers, but we may not know exactly how they work. And I know that, you're in this industry, you're an expert, you've been in it for decades. Can you tell us, like, the wafers that you make, right, and sell, how are those made, first of all?
Yeah, the silicon wafer is actually, the state-of-the-art wafer is about 300 millimeters, so it's about that big. And so it's basically a shiny, it looks like a mirror, basically, but it's a lot more than that. If you were to think of a semiconductor chip as a house, the silicon wafer is the foundation of the house, because the semiconductor is actually produced into the silicon and on top of the silicon wafer. It's a very complex process. On the silicon side, so there's about 60 process steps, and we take, basically we take these polysilicon rock, they look like rocks, shiny rocks, basically. We melt them down into a bowl, very high temperatures, and then we grow a crystal, actually grow a crystal out of that melt. Then we slice the crystal up into wafers, polish it, clean it, ship it to customers in these fancy packages. There's over 200 wafer specifications just for that one wafer, which is actually important because the more advanced the customer's process, the flatter and the cleaner the wafer has to be. In fact, if you were to take a 300 millimeter wafer and transpose that into a football field, 1 grain of sand on an entire football field is the only impurity that would be tolerated by our customer.
Oh dear.
I mean, it's
pure.
It's pure. And there's not that many companies in the world that can do it. There's just a handful of tier 1 silicon suppliers that are actually able to produce that at that high level. So
that's what you do.
And that's what we do, right.
Okay,
exactly.
So it goes from your company to, let's say, TSMC, and then what happens at TSMC?
Yeah, so now what they do is even more amazing, actually. I mentioned earlier the 12 billion transistors in a little sliver of silicon. They basically take our wafers and they etch real intricate patterns on the surface of the wafer, and they form transistors. And again, these transistors have to be very, very close to each other to make that many transistors on such a small space. But it's done through a series of patterning, etching. It just keeps going for 3 months or even longer.
Oh, so it takes 3 months to make a chip.
Depending on the process. There's several simple chips that can be done very, very quickly, like in a week or so. Some of the more advanced chips, have hundreds and hundreds of layers of etching and patterning, and it can take 3 months, even up to 6 months, depending on the technology. And then when they're done with that process, there's a wafer. You have that wafer, and on that wafer, there's many chips. You could even have over 100 chips on one wafer, depending on the technology. Some of the really cheaper chips, you could even have thousands. Really small chips. Anyway, those wafers are cut up into small chips, and those chips are actually then put in packages or modules and shipped off to mobile phone suppliers, computer companies, and then they're assembled for production.
So we hear a lot about nanometer. That's like how they, I guess, measure, how fine the process is. Can you explain what a nanometer is and why it's measured in nanometers?
Today, the state-of-the-art companies are producing at 3 nanometer, in development at 1 and 2 nanometer. A nanometer is an incredibly small unit of measure. It's actually, you can put 1 million nanometers in 1 millimeter. So we all know how big a millimeter is, and so you can take 1 million nanometers.
1 million. It's microscopic.
Completely microscopic. And another way to look at it, which I think puts it in perspective, is your fingernail grows 1 nanometer every second.
That's not much.
And I don't cut my nails that often, but that's pretty small. That is what makes the cell phones and the computers that we have just do such amazing things. Today, these chips have so much processing power, computing power. It would have taken a full room worth of computers 20 years ago. We can do it on one little chip.
So the nanometer refers to like how fine the process is?
Yeah, so it's just a way to categorize how advanced the process is.
Oh, okay.
But the nanometer itself is a way to think about it is the dimension of the patterning that's on the chip. Yeah.
That's amazing. It gets so small.
It's totally amazing. Yeah.
So, tell us about the exciting trends in the semiconductor industry. I'm sure.
There's always new trends. The one thing I learned about trends is a lot of times we think we know about trends, but sometimes trends, they're wrong and something else just shows up. Like I remember the cell phone, the mobile phone, came out of nowhere, and the iPhone came out of nowhere, really.
Really?
I never really expected what we have today. When you look at the market trends, which are the real interesting ones, of course we have artificial intelligence, which is really important and interesting right now, solving incredible problems using, and actually even mimiking the brain a little bit.
That's
actually
scary.
able to learn. That part is a little scary, I have to admit, but it came out of the gaming industry. That's
Really?
where it came from. The gaming processor chips are extremely powerful chips. And then the other thing that's really driving a lot of the development is the electrification and automation of cars. Automobiles have tremendous amount of chips in them. Of course, electric cars are really taking off. They have a lot of chips in them, almost 7 times the amount of chips than a non-electric car. And then the other trend is augmented reality and virtual reality. That's the whole thing about wearing the head, yeah. And the metaverse, the virtual metaverse, where we're all going to live in this virtual world, and we can have meetings, with people around the world in this metaverse. It feels kind of out there, but I know people that have used it, and they say that it's pretty cool.
I know you've been here in Taiwan for 2 years. You're head of an important company. How has it been for you working in Taiwan in this industry? What do you think of the people here, and working with the people here?
I'm glad you asked, because I have good things to say. Yeah, no, I really enjoy living here. I really enjoy the people, hardworking people, devoted to their companies, and no, I really like it. It's great, and it's not a surprise that Taiwan has gone from 0% chips in 1990 to 25% of the world's chips today. It's not a surprise.
Really?
To me.
Why do you say that?
Because of the work ethic. I feel that people are very, very motivated and very proud and hardworking. So I'm not surprised.
I've been speaking with Dave Adelman. He is the managing director of Siltronics AG, which is one of the leading manufacturers of silicon wafers in the world.